My name is GM Jesse Kraai, and today we are talking about the controversy, the epic battle between Silman and Hendriks. This has been going on for a long time, but it's only recently that I actually understood what Hendriks' point of view was. When I first heard the title of his first book, Move First to Think Later, I thought, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so I didn't really pay any attention to it. In this video, I'm going to get into what the debate is and why it's interesting, even if you disagree with one of the other people. I think both perspectives have some value. All right, so I think the best way to do it is to get into a position and just kind of talk through what it is we're talking about. All right, first I'm going to give the classical view. Okay, that would be Silman, a lot of other people, myself included. Now, Silman isn't here, he's dead. So I'm here to defend the old school point of view. All right, so let's just begin with a position like this. This is also a position in Willie's books. Now, the first thing I would ask a student, this is important what we ask, we're going to set Willie up here, Willie Hendriks. A teacher would come here and say, "Dear student, what do you observe about this position?" Now, a lot of times students will just be like spouting off moves. You know, they'll be going like, knight here, knight there, blah, blah, blah. And a guy like me will be like, shut up, shut up. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to think before you move. Okay. All right. So these are the things that, in order of difficulty, I would like a student to see in this position. I would like the student to see that when white played e5, they lost a tempo. And this is very hard for beginning students to learn, to see it, but that's what I would want to see. I'd want them to say black is up a tempo. Next, I would want them to see that this bishop is a little bit poor. It's restricted in its mobility. Next, I would want them to see that this square can become a danger for white, a liability. And if white takes, some kind of trade happens, then this one. So white's center is in danger of being collapsed. And at the beginning levels, that's often what happens. Okay, next, I would want, this is really now we're getting up to maybe an 1800 level. I would want both sides to see that the pointing of the pawns is significant. That since black's pawns are pointing that way, it means that black has more space on the queen side, and that is where black would like to create drama and activate their pieces. White, on the other hand, is facing the other way and would like to play on the king side. Now, once we say that, we can start saying other kind of deep-ish things, such as, well, if white makes pawn moves on the king side, that's far less dangerous than black making pawn moves on the king side, because since I have space there, it's easier for me to bring my pieces to bear onto the king side. So if any weakness happens there, my pieces can fill the gaps. And ideally, I don't want to move anything. I, being white, don't want to move anything on the queen side. Okay, so the reason for the classical view to kind of ground the player in these thoughts is, well, from that basis, it's from that you'll be able to come to find a good move instead of just saying the first thing that comes to the top of your head. So, for example, using that logic, more than 100 years ago, Nimzovich found the very interesting move and provocative, flamboyant even, Queen G4. A very deep and beautiful move where he's saying, okay, you can take it, but now I'm going to strong point this pawn, and I'm going to say that my queen is where she wants to be. I want my force on the king side. I want my initiative over there. And he won several nice games, even if the machine doesn't like this move. Okay. Then you might say to yourself, okay, well, if that doesn't work, then I would like to see if I could maintain the attacking formation, knight f3 and bishop d3. Could I maintain that? there's been battles going on forever. Could white maintain that? And from this reasoning, from this desire, hundreds of years after the fact, I came up with an interesting idea that was then used by several people, is now very current, which I called the easy system against the French. And that I did a video on that, where the idea is here, instead of recapturing, we play castles with very dynamic compensation, similar to Nimzovich's ideas in a lot of ways, where I'm going to say e5 is my strong point. That's the one I'm going to overprotect, and I'm going to have an lasting initiative against the king. So for me, the classical point of view, that's an example where reasoning led me to an interesting decision. Didn't win the game, but it led me to a very interesting dynamic decision where I liked at least white's chances. It became now cutting theory. Quick time out here. Did you know that the dojo is an incredible site with tactics, a database, a community of people trying to improve, a training program? All of this is going on at our site, so go check it out. ChessDojo.club. Hit the link in the description. So, let's go back and let's contrast that now with Hendriks's view. So Hendriks's view is totally different. He's going to say all of those words, that's mostly just mostly blah, blah. There's some words he's okay with, like he's saying, might say, yeah, development is a good thing. He might be willing to say something like that. But what he's going to say, this is where it's interesting and provocative. He's going to say all that reasoning is a bunch of hooey, because what's really going on in this position is players have experimented in this position for hundreds of years. Ideas have become available. And what's happened is players are then copying each other. And the way they learn is either by copying or then moving first and then kind of thinking about it afterwards. And the thinking is mostly, in his mind, in the form of variations. So variations being the concrete proof of any idea. Whereas the verbal reasoning that I discussed earlier, the classical point of view, that's all a bunch of hooey. Okay? So for example, in this position, he quite eloquently says that it's through experience that you might think about all the different ways in which this bishop could do something. So for example, bishop d7, bishop b5, he mentions that one. Some kind of b6, bishop a6. Some kind of situation where I go bishop d7, f6, bishop e8, and then activate this way. Some kind of situation where I move this pawn and the bad boy gets released, right? The prisoner comes free. And what Hendriks will say is, listen, listen, buddy, that's all things that happen through experience. This has nothing to do with your abstract philosophy, okay? Now, we're going to continue a little bit because he also talks about the following position. Now, he doesn't talk about this move, but to me, this is one of the deepest moves in chess, even though now it's, kind of a thing that you see so often that you might not blink when you see it. Highly controversial because white is moving on the side of the board where black supposedly has more force. So already it's controversial, right? Obviously also not developing. But the deeper idea here, which somebody came up with, I would say through reasoning, he would say through experimentation, is we want to play b4. And what this crazy thing will do is actually work as a prophylactic, that's a Nimzovichian word, gained in my mind through reasoning, where we are going to prevent black from doing stuff on the queen side. So b4, and if a5, b5. Also preventing the queen talking to b2, so that if we need to, our bishop can control our weak point. We see a very similar idea in the King's Indian with a reversed situation. I was a grown man before I realized that the King's Indian structure is a mirror image of the French. Okay. So to me, a very deep move through reasoning. For him, it would be, well, somebody did this and then other people copied him. And then variations came about to prove or disprove. All right, so then he talks about this move, c4. I can say a lot about this move. I don't like it. It's obviously preventing b4. It's completely abandoning this central fight. All right, so then he talks about this variation. Boom, boom, bishop d7, castles knight e7. Now, this is a very topical position. It's been played many times by a lot of strong players. And some of Black's ideas, well, the main one he'd really like to do is somehow get the bishop here and then into the position. Clearly, White would like to play on the king side, but notice that it's not that easy. Like, it wasn't cool that our bishop got here. It wasn't cool that our queen got blocked from Nimzovich's queen g4, right? How is it that White's gonna do something over there, right? And he would say, well, it's clearly just people are gonna keep trying stuff until they find something or they don't find something. The other things that he says, I think, are very true is at some point, there was some variations where this move b3 works. Very heretical. But the point would be if Black castles queenside, maybe I can get a little zhuzh going on over there. Also, he notes, and this is true, that somebody came up with the idea of queen c7, knight c8, knight b6, and then bishop a4 someday with a very interesting fighting game. So these two positions, I'm hoping, give a sense of what the classical view versus the Hendriks view are. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. Now, one of the most amazing things about Hendriks is he publishes this first book, Think First, Move Later, in 2012. And then he publishes 3 books on chess history: The Origin of Good Moves, The Ink War, I reviewed that here at the site, and finally, The Philosopher and the Housewife, which just came out. And this video was originally going to be a review of that book. I am going to talk about it some, but I thought this dynamic, this debate is more critical because the amazing thing that's going on with Hendriks is he writes 3 historical books, really with the agenda of saying, I'm right about this controversy of Think First, Move Later. You say, well, what is that? How does history have anything to do with that? Because there's a whole tradition of verbal reasoning that goes back all the way back. And most people would start it with Steinitz. You can go back further than that if you want. You can go back to the Romantic school if you want. But we talk about Steinitz, and then we talk about Lasker emulating the elements of Steinitz, Lasker using reasoning to play amazing strategical chess. Note the word strategical. It's hard to even conceptualize what this word strategic means if you don't have words. Right? The strategy is the story of the position. It's unfathomable to me to talk about strategy without words. Okay, then after Lasker, there's more people involved in this story, but we have, even before Lasker, we want to talk about Tarrasch, right? And we want to talk about Nimzovich. And this latest book is about the battle between Tarrasch and Nimzovich. And the Ink War is really a lot about the battle between Zukertort and Steinitz. Now, from Hendriks' point of view, the way chess improves is not by some genius articulating some kinds of strategical concepts, right? And what's really going on is you have people copying each other, learning about different ideas, and they, get better and better. And he sees this particularly happening in the opening. Why? Because you can copy. You can copy each other in the opening.
Did you know that the dojo is so much more than a podcast?
We've got tactics, a database, a training plan for everybody, a community of people trying to get better. So come check us out, ChessDojo.club. Hit the link in the description. There's also a sense where it's very interesting is when you think back on this history, there's a kind of glorification of the mind that happens when we think about reasoning. Because without reasoning, chess doesn't seem that amazing, honestly. It's like, well, what are we doing? What are we doing here without reasoning? And so chess players, you could say, are praising themselves when they talk about strategy, the depth of strategy. They're flattering their egos when they do so. And then we create deification of certain authors, let's say Nimzovich. Nimzovich, I feel, is the one very controversial today, but throughout, let's say, the direct aftermath of Nimzovich all the way to when I was a kid, there definitely was a huge respect to be like, oh, this dude discovered prophylaxis. He discovered what a strong point means. He discovered like ways to play the position, right? And in Hendriks's view, he's saying, no, actually, most of this stuff, first of all, was already discovered. And second of all, it's a bunch of verbosity that doesn't actually help you all that much. So totally different points of view. And, you know, he does give, let's say, voice to, let's say, Petrosian, who talks about Nimzovich, or, you know, to my mind, when I read 60 Memorable Games, which, you know, he has this amazing quote about Nimzovich in his amazing Grunfeld game against against Botvinnik. And then when you watch Fischer Miag Mazur in one of the most amazing games ever, it's all about the philosophy of this position that Nimzovich puts forward. But even though we start, actually, it's the same thing, it's the same philosophy, but we start from this position and we're gonna get a structure with E5, but it's gonna be a very similar dynamic, and it's all about stopping F6. And when you see that game and you think about Nimzovich, you're like, oh, dude had a story that he was putting in motion, even if the engine doesn't like a lot of Fischer's moves. Okay, so I want to say, first of all, I really enjoy the historical work that Hendriks did. It's very necessary. We don't have many historians going into archives. So I really appreciate that aspect of the work, and that's why I got into it in the first place. I would not have had my mind opened to Hendriks if it wasn't through this historical avenue. Okay. So I'm gonna now give, let's say, closing arguments for both cases, right? So first, the classical view, which is, as I said, mine. My experience has been that me teaching players and explaining basic things to them, such as this position, has been of great help to me in terms of thinking about chess reasoning. Okay, huge importance for me improving. When I review my games, I do so with reasoning, and I try to find good moves with reasoning, and that practice helps me find good moves in my own games, right? When, you know, I'm reviewing those games too, I'm always doing it with reasoning, strategy taking the lead. That is to say, using strategy to find the best moves. And even when I'm doing problems, tactics, I'll ground myself first in the position. What's going on? What's the story of the position before I even try to find a move? Okay, finally, this is the most interesting thing, I think. To a certain extent, if chess didn't have reasoning, I'm not sure I'd want to play it. I don't know. So obviously that has no effect on the argument of whether you should be reasoning or not, but it's just an aesthetic thing where I very much enjoy the strategic aspect of the game, and I wouldn't really want to have chess without it. Okay, So now let's talk about Hendriks' view. He has a number of interesting things to say here. One is, let's think about Fisher random for a second. Now, if you imagine chess to be a bunch of people copying each other and learning the ins and outs of a situation like this French position, then Fisher random is a disaster, because you're like, oh, I kind of learned the ins and outs of the ideas, plans, memorizing other people's ideas, variations, and now it's all gone. So he thinks that his skill level drops dramatically when he's playing Fisher random. Interesting thought. The next thing that's really interesting, in a way we can start thinking about proving his point, is with the Queen's Gambit generation, there are a number of players who are getting, it seems like, pretty good just playing blitz chess. And I think what they're doing is they're playing blitz chess, then looking at what the computer says and using the computer suggestions to see how they could have played better. So they have this amazing coach at their side. Now, a couple interesting things. In the world of blitz, there are no words, or very few. There's not a lot of strategic thinking. Like when I'm playing blitz, I'll sometimes have strategic thinking, but it'll be like, oh, I've seen this before, and I know how to do this kind of thing because he's made a strategic mistake, right? But I'm not, in that short amount of time, really able to think deeply about strategic reasoning and then make some amazing move. That's just not the way it goes, I don't think, for anybody. Further, this same player would be Hendriks's ideal in the sense that they're going to go, say, to Chessable and start memorizing a bunch of moves. And for Hendriks, the beauty of the opening is when you're memorizing those moves, you are imitating good moves that were made by other players. You don't necessarily understand those moves when you make them. And one of his best metaphors, I feel, is this story of boat building. So forget chess for a moment and imagine somebody building a boat. Now, one way of thinking about it's called the classical view, would be that somebody thought deeply about what a boat should be. And then they created this boat. And they were a genius. And there's a long line of geniuses behind us who've created boats. His view is, oh no, it wasn't like that at all. Most of these boats sank. There was a battle with the ocean, and most of these boats sank. And in the whole evolution of boat building, it had nothing to do with reasoning, but rather which boats sank. And then the boats that didn't sink were copied, right? And so by copying moves, you're not thinking strategical thoughts, you're just kind of doing it. And obviously you could get good at tactics in a kind of way without words as well, or at least one could imagine that you could get good at tactics. I have my problems there too with it, but that's his view. Finally, with his new generation, where I think his argument is actually strongest, is if you're just analyzing with the computer has no words. The computer has no strategic blah, 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 right? And this computer will show you amazing ideas, moves of incredible beauty, and you won't, in Hendriks's view then, you don't even need to verbalize them. You just need to kind of digest them in some way and store them, and then maybe they'll come back to you when you're playing the game. So one of the great things I like about this argument is there's a little bit of empirical testing going on right now as to which way is right. I think for the Queen's Gambit generation, for example, there are a number of players out there. I'm seeing them too when I'm playing just blitz chess, who are untitled players who are playing above 2,700 chess.com. And I'm like, who are these people? How do you get to be 2,700 without even having a title, right? Even the little CM next to their name. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch out for. Could somebody get really good just doing that, right? My intuition, the classical view's intuition is, of course, no, right? But this is kind of the stage of the debate. And so while the classical view, I would definitely say, is still predominant, there's every reason to think that Hendriks's view could come to the fore and that he's the early pusher of this new machine reality that might also be called anti-philosophy or empiricism.